By 7:03 that morning, Mason Reed opened his broken front door and saw 50 black luxury cars blocking the only dirt road to his house. Not 5, not 10, 50. Black sedans and SUVs stretched past the fence line, shining like wet ink against the Tennessee grass, while men in dark suits stood beside them with their hands folded and their eyes fixed on the porch. Mason did not step back. He only tightened his fingers around the edge of the door, because his 8-year-old daughter was standing behind his leg in bare feet, holding the chipped white mug with the faded blue bird on its side. "Dad," Lily whispered, "why are there 50 cars in our yard?" Across the road, Mrs. Barlow had already raised her phone. A pickup slowed near the mailbox. Somebody muttered, "What did he do?" Then a blonde woman in a red dress stepped out of the lead car, her heels touching the gravel like she owned the ground beneath it. Vivian Hart looked at Mason's worn denim shirt, the cracked porch boards, the child hiding behind him, and the old bird cup in Lily's hands. For 1 second, her face changed. Not fear, recognition. Then the man beside her, tall, silver-haired, and smiling too calmly, leaned close and said, "Ma'am, are you sure this is him?" Mason heard it. Lily heard it too, and Mason's jaw tightened just enough for the nearest guard to notice. Before this story goes any further, ask yourself what you would do if 50 cars showed up outside your home before breakfast. Drop where you're watching from, and subscribe if you believe some stories are too strange to be ignored. Mason Reed had spent the last 3 years making sure nothing like this ever happened. He fixed cars behind Burke's Auto on Route 11, drove the tow truck when tourists slid into ditches, and paid every bill in cash when he could, because paper trails had a way of finding men who wanted to be left alone. His house was small, gray, and leaning slightly to one side, but Lily's lunch was packed every morning. Her shoes were lined by the door. Her homework sat under a refrigerator magnet shaped like a sunflower. Poverty lived there, but chaos did not. That was the difference Mason protected with both hands. He had one rule for Lily: tell the truth, even when your voice shakes. But he had never told her all of his. The chipped mug in her hands had stayed on the top shelf for almost a year, turned so the blue bird faced the wall. Mason had meant to throw it away more than once. He never did. It belonged to the night a lost woman came out of the rain shaking so hard she could not hold it steady. Mason had not known her name then. He had not known she was a billionaire. He had only known she was bleeding, freezing, and looking over her shoulder like the dark behind her had teeth. Now that same woman stood in his yard with a private army and a line of cars worth more than every house on the road combined. Vivian took one step toward the porch. Mason shifted just enough to put his body between her and Lily. The silver-haired man's smile thinned. "Mr. Reed," he said, loud enough for the neighbors to hear, "this will be easier if you cooperate." Mason looked at the convoy, then at the woman in red, then at the mug trembling in his daughter's small hands. He spoke quietly. "Lily, go inside." But Vivian's voice cut through the morning before the child could move. "Mason," she said, and the whole road seemed to hold its breath. The brakes were cut again. Mason did not move until Lily was inside. He waited for the soft click of the kitchen door, then the smaller sound after it, chair legs scraping the floor, because she always dragged one to the window when adults told her not to look. Only then did he step onto the porch. The boards bowed under his boots. 50 polished cars sat in front of a house with peeling paint, a rusted gutter, and a screen door Mason had repaired with fishing line 2 summers ago. It would have looked almost unreal if it had not felt so dangerous. Vivian Hart stayed at the bottom step, close enough for Mason to see the sleepless gray beneath her makeup. Grant Voss stood half a pace behind her, clean suit, clean shoes, clean smile. Men like him never looked dirty, even when they carried mud into somebody else's life. The brakes were cut again, Vivian said, quieter now, as if repeating it made the danger real. Mason's eyes moved past her to the lead SUV. Front tire, brake dust, fresh gravel under the chassis. He saw too much before he stopped himself. That was the problem with old training. It did not ask permission to wake up. "Then call the police," he said. Grant gave a small laugh. "We did. That's why we're here." Mason looked toward the mailbox, where Mrs. Barlow's phone was still pointed at him. He could already imagine the caption by noon. Poor mechanic questioned by billionaire security. Black father hiding woman's secret. Trouble at the Reed place. Inside the house, Lily's breakfast sat untouched on the table. Toast cut into 4 squares, 1 boiled egg, and a folded napkin because Mason had taught her that poor did not mean careless. Beside it was his cracked phone, 2 past-due notices, and the coffee can where he kept receipts from every tow, every repair, every dollar he had made since the day a judge asked whether a man who worked nights could provide a stable home for a little girl. Mason had never forgotten that word. Stable. Not loving. Not present. Stable. So he became stable in all the ways people could measure. Rent before pride. Lunch before sleep. Hair brushed before dawn. Shoes by the door. No shouting. No drinking. No strangers in the house. Except once. One stormy night. One woman shivering in his kitchen with blood on her sleeve and fear sitting behind her eyes like a second person. Lily had been asleep then. Mason had wrapped Vivian in an old gray blanket, poured coffee into the bird cup, and placed a towel under her muddy heels so she would not feel ashamed for staining the floor. He had not touched her except to steady her when her knees buckled. He had not asked for money. He had not asked for her last name. By sunrise, she was gone, but the mug stayed. Now Lily stood behind the kitchen curtain, holding that same cup against her chest like it was something alive. Vivian saw her. For the first time, the billionaire's face lost its boardroom stillness. "Is that your daughter?" she asked. Mason's voice stayed flat. "She's not part of this." Grant's eyes slid toward the window. Children become part of things when their parents make poor decisions. Mason turned his head slowly. He did not raise his voice. He did not step closer. But the porch seemed to go quieter around him. "Don't speak about my child." Lily heard that too. Her small fingers tightened around the chipped handle. Vivian looked from the cup to Mason, then to Grant, and something uncertain moved through her eyes. Not trust. Not yet. Just the first crack in the story someone had told her about the man on the porch. Then Mason's phone buzzed on the kitchen table. Lily glanced down through the window. The screen lit up with a number from the county school office. Under it, another message appeared from Burke's Auto. "Don't come in today. Too much attention." Mason saw both from where he stood, and his face changed only once. So quickly most people missed it. Vivian did not. Grant smiled again and opened the rear door of the lead car. "Now," he said, "shall we discuss this somewhere more appropriate than your porch?" Mason looked back at Lily, at the bird cup in her hands, at the breakfast going cold. Then he reached for his keys because the world he had spent 3 years avoiding had just opened a black car door and waited for him to step inside. Mason had ridden in tow trucks with cracked windshields, patrol cars after accident reports, and once in the back of an ambulance with Lily burning through a fever he could not afford to ignore. But he had never sat inside a car this quiet. The black SUV moved down the dirt road without a rattle, leather seats swallowing every bump that his old Ford would have cursed out loud. Lily sat beside him, buckled in tight, the bird cup wrapped in both hands because she had refused to leave it behind. Mason had told her she could stay with Mrs. Barlow. Lily had looked at the strangers in suits and said, "If they're asking about our house, I'm coming." He had not argued. Some children were raised by fear. Lily had been raised by truth, and that made her harder to fool. The convoy carried them 30 miles to Hartwell Logistics Regional Command Center, a glass building outside Knoxville that rose from the highway like it had been dropped there from another world. Its windows reflected the morning sun so sharply Mason had to lower his eyes. A guard opened the SUV door before he touched the handle. Inside, the lobby floor was white stone, polished enough to show the worn soles of Mason's work boots and the red clay caught in the seams. Lily noticed it too. Her sneakers squeaked once, then went still. Behind the marble desk, a receptionist looked at Mason's denim shirt, his grease-darkened knuckles, the child holding a chipped mug, and the question on her face was clear without being spoken. "Why is he here?" Grant Voss answered it for her. "Mr. Reed is a witness," he said, with just enough pause to make the words sound like suspect. 2 security men shifted closer. Mason felt Lily's shoulder brush his hand. He did not reach down too fast. He did not want them to see fear and mistake it for guilt. Vivian walked ahead, but not comfortably. Every person in the lobby straightened when they saw her, yet her eyes kept moving to reflective surfaces, elevator doors, black glass, the chrome strip on the security desk, as if she expected danger to appear behind her own image. Mason saw that too. He saw the tremor she hid by pressing her thumb against the inside of her ring finger. He saw the fresh scrape under the cuff of her sleeve. He saw Grant watching him notice. At the elevator, a guard lifted a hand toward Lily's cup. No outside items past this point. Lily pulled it to her chest. "It's just a mug." "Policy," the guard said. Mason placed one hand gently in front of Lily, not touching the guard, not challenging him, just becoming a wall. "It stays with her." Grant smiled. "It may be evidence, Mr. Reed, or it may be stolen property." The lobby quieted around that sentence. A woman near the coffee bar lowered her phone, but kept recording. Lily looked up at her father, confused and ashamed for a thing she had not done. Mason's voice stayed low. "A child holding a cup doesn't make her a thief." Vivian stopped walking. For a moment, something crossed her face, small and painful, as if the sentence had reached a room in her memory no one else had been allowed to enter. Then Grant stepped between them and pressed the elevator button himself. "Let him bring it," he said. "The board will enjoy the story." The doors opened onto a private floor of glass walls, framed awards, and a long table where 12 people in tailored suits were already waiting. Mason stepped in with red dirt on his boots, Lily beside him, and the chipped bird cup between her hands like the only honest thing in the room. At the far end of the table, Vivian turned back to him and said, almost too quietly for anyone else to hear, "Tell me exactly what you saw under my car that night." Mason looked at Grant first, and Grant's smile disappeared. The boardroom did not smell like coffee or oil or rain. It smelled like lemon polish, cold air, and expensive silence. Mason stood near the end of the glass table with Lily tucked close to his side, while 12 board members studied him like a problem that had wandered in from the wrong neighborhood. Vivian remained standing too. She had not taken the chair at the head of the table, and that alone made the room uneasy. Grant placed a slim folder in front of her. "Before Mr. Reed performs his memory for us," he said, "the board should understand that he has no official report, no chain of custody, and no documented relationship to Ms. Hart beyond a very unusual night in his home." Mason watched Grant's fingers slide off the folder. Smooth hands, no tornillos, no grease under the cuticles. A man who signed trouble, not fixed it. Vivian looked at Mason. "What did you see?" Mason did not answer right away. His eyes moved to the cup in Lily's hands. The faded blue bird faced outward now, wings half open, a tiny crack running through its painted chest. Lily noticed him looking and set the mug carefully on the glass table. The sound was small. Everyone heard it. Grant's gaze sharpened. "That belongs to Hartwell's private retreat," he said. "It was never yours." Lily's cheeks flushed. Mason put 2 fingers on the table beside the mug, not touching it, just near enough to steady her without making a scene. "She drank from in my kitchen," he said. "That's why it stayed." "Where you kept it as a souvenir," Grant said. A few board members shifted. Mason did not look at them. He turned the cup slowly until the underside faced the light. There, beneath a thin line of dried clay Mason had never scrubbed away, was a stamped mark most people would have missed. HGL Ridge House, Unit 6. Vivian leaned forward. Her face tightened. Ridge House was closed that weekend. Grant answered too quickly. "For maintenance." Mason looked at him then. "No, sir. It wasn't." The room changed by half an inch. Not enough to save him. Enough to make people listen. Mason pointed to the clay caught in the cup's foot ring. "That mud doesn't come from my road. Too red. Too fine. It comes from the East Service slope behind Ridge House. Same clay sticks to break dust when a car sits overnight after rain." One board member frowned. "You expect us to believe you can tell that by looking at a mug?" Mason's voice stayed calm. "No, I expect you to check the service cameras." Grant laughed softly. "There are no service cameras from that night. Storm damage." Vivian looked at him, not at Mason, at Grant, just for a second. Lily, still staring at the mug, whispered, "Dad, that's the same dirt that was on your flashlight." The room went still enough for the air system to sound loud. Mason closed his eyes once. He had cleaned the flashlight. He had not known Lily had seen it. Vivian's hand moved to her sleeve, to the scrape Mason had noticed downstairs, as if memory were beginning to return through the skin. "What flashlight?" she asked. Grant shut the folder. "Hard. This is exactly why we don't bring children into corporate matters." Mason lifted his eyes, then stopped using a child's cup like evidence against her. For the first time, Vivian did not look away from him. The proof was not enough. Not yet, but doubt had entered the room, and it had chosen a seat. Then Grant's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and the calm smile came back. "Sheriff's office just sent over the overnight welfare log from last year," he said. "It appears Mr. Reed failed to report a vulnerable woman in his home for nearly 6 hours." He looked straight at Mason. Now we can talk about what he was really hiding. For one fragile moment, Mason thought the room might choose silence over suspicion. Vivian had not defended him, but she had stopped looking at him like a problem. One board member had reached for his tablet. Another had whispered the word "service cameras" under his breath. Even Lily seemed to feel the air soften because her hand loosened around the bird cup and her shoulders dropped half an inch. It was not trust. It was only a crack in the wall. But sometimes a crack was where daylight started. Then Grant turned the sheriff's welfare log toward the table, and the crack closed. 6 hours, he said. A wealthy woman, injured and disoriented, inside the home of a man who did not contact law enforcement, medical services, or Hartwell security. The way he said wealthy made it sound like motive. The way he said woman made it sound like accusation. Mason felt Lily look up at him. That hurt more than the board members staring. Vivian's face tightened, not because she believed Grant completely, but because the words had found the fear every powerful woman learns to carry in private. A strange house, a missing night, a man she barely knew. Mason could see the doubt pass through her, and he did not blame her for it. That was what made it worse. He could have ended part of it right there. He could have said she begged him not to call anyone. He could have said she was terrified of Grant. He could have told them about the brake line, the mud, the shaking hands, the way she kept whispering about a red file, while rainwater dripped from her hair onto his kitchen floor. But saying it would pull Lily into a year-old police report, a custody review, and questions about why Mason Reed knew how to read a staged crash better than any roadside mechanic should. So he stayed still. Grant knew exactly where to press. "Mr. Reed," he said, "did you or did you not keep Miss Hart in your home overnight without reporting her condition?" Mason's hands rested flat on the glass table. His left thumb was close enough to the chipped cup to feel its cool edge. "She was cold," he said. "She was bleeding. She said she wasn't safe." A board member scoffed. "That is not an answer. It's the only one that matters," Mason said. The room did not like that. Men in expensive suits rarely enjoyed being reminded that procedure and decency were not always the same thing. Then Mason's cracked phone buzzed in his pocket. He looked down once. The county school office again. Under it, a text from Lily's teacher. "Reporters are calling the school. Is Lily safe?" Mason's breath changed. Barely, but Lily saw it. "Dad," she whispered. Grant saw it too, and his smile returned without warmth. "This is why stability matters," he said. "Children need protection from the choices adults make." Vivian looked at Grant sharply, but he was already sliding another paper across the table. "I've prepared a simple statement. Mr. Reed confirms he misunderstood the situation, relinquishes the item taken from Hartwell property, and agrees not to discuss Ms. Hart's private condition again. In return, we make today's attention disappear." Lily pulled the bird cup closer. Mason looked at the paper, then at his daughter, then at Vivian. For the first time, the billionaire looked less like a CEO and more like the woman who had sat in his kitchen, both hands around that cup, trying not to shake. Mason could walk out, sign the lie, keep his job, maybe, keep the school from asking questions, keep Lily from hearing grown people turn kindness into something ugly. Or he could refuse and let the whole machine aim at the one part of his life he could not replace. He picked up the pen. The boardroom seemed to exhale. Grant's smile widened. Mason did not sign. He set the pen down beside the bird cup and pushed the statement back. "My daughter is going to know her father told the truth," he said. Grant leaned in, voice soft enough to sound polite and cruel at the same time. Then you should understand the next call will not be from the school, Mr. Reed. It will be from Child Protective Services. Grant did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The words Child Protective Services had already done the work. They moved through the boardroom like a cold hand, touching every parent at the table, every lawyer, every security guard, every person who understood that some threats did not have to be shouted to be real. Lily went very still. Mason felt it before he looked at her. The bird cup was pressed to her chest now, the chipped rim turned inward, as if she could protect it by making herself smaller. That was the first thing that almost broke him. Not Grant's smile, not the board staring. His daughter, shrinking in a room built by people who had never had to prove they deserved their own children. Vivian saw it too. Her hand moved toward the table, then stopped. Courage for a woman surrounded by her own company should have been easy. It was not. Grant had built the trap carefully. If she defended Mason too fast, he would call her compromised. If Mason spoke too much, he would look unstable. If he stayed silent, Grant's version became the only version in the room. This is a standard protective measure, Grant said, sliding the statement closer. No one is accusing you of being an unfit father. Not yet. Mason looked down at the paper. The language was clean, soft, poisonous. Misunderstanding. Emotional distress. Unauthorized possession of company property. Agreement not to discuss. He could sign it, give up the bird cup, walk Lily out before the reporters reached her school, and let Vivian Hart fight her own war with people who had lawyers on speed dial and helicopters on rooftops. That would be the safe thing. Maybe even the smart thing. Then Lily whispered, "Dad, did helping her make us bad?" The question landed harder than any accusation. Mason closed his eyes once. When he opened them, he did not look at Grant. He looked at Vivian. "Last year," he said quietly, "she asked me not to call anyone with Hartwell access." Grant cut in immediately. Speculation. Mason nodded once, as if he had expected it. "That's why I didn't say it before." He turned to the closest security camera in the corner of the boardroom, the black glass dome above the door. "But since you brought my child into it, I want every word recorded." Grant's smile faded by a fraction. Mason reached for the bird cup. Lily did not let go at first. He waited. He did not pull. After a second, she gave it to him. He set it in the center of the glass table, between the statement and Vivian's folded hands. "You want the cup because it places her at Ridge House when you said Ridge House was closed," Mason said. "You want me quiet because I saw the cut." Grant leaned forward. "You are a roadside mechanic trying to sound important." Mason's voice stayed even. "No, I'm a father trying not to make my daughter watch a lie win." The room held its breath. Then Grant turned to the board. "This proves my point. He is escalating. Security, please remove Mr. Reed until counsel arrives. The child stays here with MS." Hart's assistant. Lily grabbed Mason's sleeve. Vivian stood at last, but Grant was faster. "Careful, Vivian," he said softly. "The emergency board vote begins in 20 minutes. If you look unstable, they won't just remove him." Mason understood then. The trap had never been only for him. It was built for both of them. He could fight and give Grant the chaos he wanted. Or he could walk out and leave Vivian alone with the man who had cut the brakes twice. Mason picked up the bird cup, placed it gently back in Lily's hands, and bent close to her ear. "Hold on to this," he whispered, "and remember who asked for it." Then he straightened, raised both hands where everyone could see them, and let security lead him toward the glass doors while Lily's voice broke behind him. "Dad!" Mason did not turn around until Grant said one last thing. "Maybe now we can discuss the woman he lost in the first brake failure." Mason stopped cold. For a moment, nobody moved. Not the guards. Not the board. Not Vivian Hart, standing at the head of her own table with the color draining from her face. Mason stood between two security men with his hands still raised, but something inside him had gone silent in a way the room could feel. Grant had not said her name. He did not have to. The woman Mason lost in the first brake failure was buried in a small cemetery behind New Hope Baptist, under a stone Lily visited every Sunday with wildflowers and questions no child should have to ask. Mason slowly lowered his hands. One guard reached for him, then stopped when Mason looked at him. There was no anger in that look. That was what made it heavier. "Don't use my wife," Mason said. Grant's smile returned, thinner now, sharpened by the fact that he had found the old wound. Your wife's accident was ruled mechanical failure. Tragic, of course, but it does raise concerns about your judgment, your fixation, your ability to separate grief from fact. A murmur passed through the boardroom. Mason saw it happen in their eyes. The story shifted. He was no longer a father who had helped a frightened woman. He was a grieving man projecting one tragedy onto another. A safer thing to dismiss. A cleaner thing to remove. Then Lily stepped out from beside the assistant who had tried to keep her back. She did not run. She walked with both hands around the bird cup, her face pale, her chin trembling. "My mom died in a car," she said. The room went quiet in a different way. Not legal quiet. Human quiet. Mason's chest tightened. "Lily." She looked at him, tears shining but not falling. "You always say truth doesn't stop being true because people don't like it." That was the partial mercy of the moment. For 1 second, people saw him through his child's eyes. Not as a suspect. Not as a poor mechanic dragged into a billionaire's boardroom. As the man who had taught a little girl how to stand still when the room wanted her ashamed. Vivian looked at Grant, and for the first time, doubt became something sharper. "How did you know about his wife?" she asked. Grant's answer came too fast. "Background review." Mason heard the mistake. So did Vivian. Background review could explain a death certificate. It could not explain the phrase, first brake failure. Mason looked at the black dome camera above the door, then at the cup in Lily's hands. He could say it now. He could tear the room open with the truth he had carried for 3 years. But if he did it with Lily standing there, her mother's death would become evidence before it was grief. Her life would become a file. Her pain would become leverage. Mason made the only choice that still belonged to him. He turned to Vivian. "Get her out of this room." Vivian blinked. "Mason, please." It was the first time his voice cracked. Not for himself. For his child. Vivian moved then, not like a savior, but like a woman finally understanding the cost of waiting too long. She crossed to Lily and knelt just enough to meet her eyes. "May I take you somewhere quiet?" Lily looked at Mason. He nodded once. She did not want to go, but she handed him the bird cup first. "Don't let him take it," she whispered. Mason wrapped his fingers around the chipped ceramic. Warm from her hands. Small enough to break. Heavy enough to hold a year of silence. As Vivian led Lily through the side door, Grant exhaled like he had won. Now that the child is gone, Mason placed the cup on the glass table. The sound cut him off. "Now," Mason said, "you and I can talk about why you knew there was a first one." Grant's face did not change, but his right hand slipped toward his phone onto the table. And this time, the camera was still recording. Mason did not look at Grant's hand. He looked at the black camera dome above the door, then at the 12 people around the glass table who had spent the last hour deciding what kind of man he was before asking what kind of truth he carried. "Don't call anyone," Mason said. Grant's fingers froze onto the table. "Unless you want them to hear this too." The boardroom went still. Vivian had returned to the doorway without Lily, her face pale, one hand resting on the frame as if she needed the wall to stay upright. Mason touched the chipped bird cup with 2 fingers and turned it until the little blue bird faced Grant. "Last year, Miss Hart came to my house from Ridge House. Not from the main road. From the East Service slope. That matters because whoever sent her car into that ditch knew she would avoid the front gate." Grant leaned back. "This is fantasy." Mason nodded once. "Then correct me." He pointed to the clay dried inside the cup's foot ring. "That clay holds brake dust because she carried this cup back to the car after I gave it to her. She was trying to remember where she had parked. I followed with my flashlight. The right rear brake line had a clean diagonal slice. Not torn. Not rusted. Cut." A board member whispered. "How would you know?" Mason lifted his eyes. "Because before I fixed tow trucks, I investigated crash scenes for the state of Tennessee." The room seemed to lose sound. Even the air system faded. Grant's smile disappeared completely. Mason did not enjoy it. He only kept going because Lily was somewhere beyond that wall. And one day she would ask if he had stopped when the room got uncomfortable. 3 years ago, my wife died after the same kind of cut was called mechanical failure. I filed objections. They disappeared. I asked for the Ridge House maintenance logs back then because Hartwell trucks used that road. I was told there were none. Vivian turned slowly toward Grant. "You knew him before today." Grant said nothing. That silence did more damage than any confession could have. Mason reached into his jacket and pulled out an old folded receipt, soft at the creases, kept flat for years in a coffee, because poor men learn to save paper when paper is the only thing powerful people respect. He placed it beside the cup. Tokal, Ridge House, East Slope. Same week my wife died. Same contractor. Same service code stamped under that mug. One board member stood. Another reached for the conference phone. Grant's hand moved again, faster this time, but Vivian crossed the room and pressed the record button on the table console herself. Not to save Mason, to stop the room from swallowing him. Say it again, she whispered. Mason looked at the men who had called him unstable, at the security guards who had reached for his child's cup, at Grant, who had turned grief into a weapon. Then he spoke clearly. The man who cut Vivian Hart's brakes used the same access road, the same contractor cover, and the same failure pattern used in my wife's death. He looked at Grant, and you knew there was a first one before anyone in this room did. The boardroom went silent. Not polite silent. Guilty silent. Phones lowered. Eyes dropped. Grant stood too quickly, and his chair struck the glass wall behind him. This is inadmissible. Vivian's voice cut through him, low and shaking. No, Grant. It's recorded. The side door opened then, and Lily stepped halfway in, still red-eyed, still small but standing. Mason turned toward her, and for the first time since the 50 cars arrived, his face softened. She looked at the cup on the table, then at her father. Did you tell the truth? Mason nodded. Yes, baby. Behind him, Vivian Hart faced the board, the woman in red no longer standing above the poor black father from the dirt road, but beside the truth he had carried alone. This man didn't take anything from me, she said. He gave me back the night you all tried to bury. Grant opened his mouth, but no one in the room was looking at him anymore. The room did not celebrate. It did not relax. It simply stopped, like a machine that had been running on a lie, finally losing power. Lily stood close to Mason, still holding the chipped bird cup, her fingers no longer shaking, but not fully calm either. Calm was something the body learns after danger, not during it. Vivian crossed the boardroom slowly, not like a CEO returning to control, like someone walking through the aftermath of a decision she could no longer undo. She stopped in front of Lily first, not Mason. Lily, you're safe, she said again, but this time it sounded less like a statement and more like something she was trying to believe herself. Lily looked up at her father instead of answering. Mason gave a small nod. Only then did Lily breathe out, like she had been holding air for an entire hour. Grant was no longer speaking. That mattered more than anything he had said all day. Men like him did not lose their voice easily. They only lost it when the room stopped feeding them power. Vivian turned toward the board. The emergency vote is canceled, she said. No one argued. Not because they agreed, but because the version of events they had been given no longer felt stable enough to protect them. She continued, voice lower now. An internal audit will review everything that was presented here. From both sides. That was not victory. That was containment. Mason understood the difference. He had spent his life around broken things. Some could be fixed. Some could only be documented before they collapsed again. Lily tugged slightly at his sleeve. Dad, she whispered, are we okay now? Mason looked at her for a long second before answering. We're together, he said. That's the only part that matters. Vivian heard it. Something in her expression shifted, not toward gratitude, not toward admiration, but toward recognition. The kind that comes when you realize someone did not need saving. They only needed to not be destroyed. Grant finally moved toward the door, but security did not rush him. They simply watched him leave. That was worse. Being escorted suggests importance. Being ignored suggests replacement. Before he exited, he turned once. This isn't finished, he said. Mason did not respond. He had stopped responding to men like that years ago. Vivian followed Grant's movement with her eyes, then closed them briefly, as if memorizing the cost of what had just been exposed. When she opened them again, she walked back to the table and picked up the bird cup. She studied the small painted bird, the crack running through its chest, the chipped rim worn by a year of silence. Then she placed it back into Lily's hands herself. "This belongs to you," she said quietly. Lily held it tighter than before. Not like something fragile anymore. Like something proven. Mason looked at Vivian. "You don't have to fix this," he said. She shook her head once. "I'm not fixing it," she replied. "I'm not letting it be buried again." A long pause followed. The kind that does not belong to conflict anymore, but to consequence. Mason took Lily's hand. The three of them stood there for a moment. Father, child, and the woman who had walked into his life in a storm and walked out of it changed. As they turned toward the exit, Vivian spoke once more. Not loudly, not officially. "Mason," he stopped but did not turn fully. "Yes. If you ever wonder why I came here with 50 cars," she said, "it wasn't to intimidate you. A beat. It was to make sure no one could quietly erase you again." Mason nodded once. Not acceptance, not trust, just understanding. He walked out holding Lily's hand. The hallway outside was too bright after everything inside it. Behind them, the boardroom did not resume. It did not conclude. It simply remained open, like a case that would not close cleanly. And somewhere in that unfinished silence, the truth finally stopped being something Mason had to carry alone. Have you ever been misunderstood when all you were trying to do was the right thing? Would you have opened your door for Vivian that night, knowing it could put your child, your name, and your whole life at risk? Leave your answer below. Tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe for more stories about people who stay good even when the world makes goodness expensive.